Hashem. Okay, good morning, everyone. We are learning the Ilan Nishmas Mendel Mariam Bas Kalman Ruvain. We are on the bottom of Ayin Beis Amud Aleph 72a. Okay, Ayin Beis Amud Aleph 72a. And we have a much easier Gemara than the past, so Baruch Hashem. Okay, hopefully we turned a corner. So, okay, Itzmar, it was stated. Okay, so we're going to learn the following teaching. Now we're turning the page. We're on Ayin Beis Amud Aleph 72b. So, Niskaven Lagbi as a talush. Let's say a person intended to lift something that was detached from the ground, right? So you see, a person sees, I don't know, some item that's on the ground, and they think it's detached. They don't think that it's attached. They see it's a flower that's detached, that's lying on the ground. They plan on picking it up and putting it on their Shabbos table. So they plan on picking it up. But instead, they cut something that was attached. Right, so they planned on picking up something that was not attached, and they end up picking up something that was attached, right? Or sometimes you just like something fell on the ground, right? Let's say a person dropped something on the floor, and you plan on picking that thing up, right? You dropped your keys on the floor, and you plan on picking up your keys, and you're a little clumsy, and you end up picking up a piece of grass, right? Now, picking up your keys is absolutely nothing, right? There's no problem picking up your keys on Shabbos in a place with an Erev. Picking up a piece of grass is a Isser D'Oraisa, right? Separating a piece of grass is Isser D'Oraisa. So I plan on picking up my keys, and instead I end up picking up a piece of grass. All right. So what's the halacha? Pater. In that case, you are completely exempt from a chatas because your action, meaning until then we've been talking about cases of mistakes. Now, mistake is, we'll have another example of a mistake. Over here, the action you did was not an action that was usr at all. It wasn't even like a mistaken action of isser. In other words, let's say the classic cases we've had of a chatas is I did something that was forbidden. I didn't know was forbidden. Over here, my intention is to do something which is permitted, and I happen to do something which is forbidden. So I'm completely exempt, right? Makes sense, right? So basically I'm doing something which I think is I'm intending to do something which is intrinsically permitted, and I end up doing something which is forbidden, right? And I plan on picking up the keys, and by mistake, I end up picking up a piece of grass. I don't even bring a carbon chatas. Like, that is less than your regular classic case of mistake. So, let's say a person plans on they plan on putting their hand against the wall, and they end up putting their hand against the light, right? That's not a case of the classic mistake because they plan on putting their hand against the wall, like to lean on the wall, and they slipped or whatever it is, and they end up pushing the light, right? So that's like the lowest level of mistake. You don't even bring a korban chatas in that case, okay? However, lachtoch es talush. Let's say a person plans on cutting something that was detached from the ground, right? So here they plan on doing some cutting, right? So we'll talk later about what type of cutting, what cutting is permitted, what cutting is not permitted. But let's say take a pair of scissors, which you could technically use on Shabbos, depends on the scenario, and you plan on cutting something which is detached. Again, let's go back to the case of the flower that I started with. So you have a flower that's lying on the ground, and you plan on cutting a flower which is detached from the ground. So there's no real isser because it's something which is already detached. But instead, you end up cutting something that was attached, right? So you plan on doing an act of cutting, right? And you, instead of cutting the thing which was detached, you end up cutting something which was attached. In that case, we have machlokas because there the action is one of cutting. It's just that depends on the what you're cutting. That will depend on what the isser is. So there, Rava Amar Pater. Rava says you're going to be exempt in such a case from even a karban. Abaye Amar Chayev, whereas Abaye says you're going to be chayev in that case. Okay, so right there's the two cases. So in a case where a person plans on picking up something which is completely detached, and then they end up cutting something which was attached, there the action you intended, the action you did have no relationship to one another, and you're completely exempt. But in a case where you planned on cutting something, and you plan on cutting something which was detached, which would be exempt, and you end up cutting something which was attached, there you have machlokas, Rava and Abaye. Rava says you're exempt in that case, and Abaye says you are pater. Okay? Yeah? So, yeah.
It doesn't matter in this second case whether it's attached or not. It's permitted to cut?
You could cut things on Shabbos. What you're not allowed to do is cut things in a way that is a precise type of cutting. Yeah, or there's harvesting. So if it's attached, then it's a form of separating from the ground, which is forbidden. I mean, it's right. But cutting itself is permitted. It's you could cut something on Shabbos. What you can't do is cut something in a very precise fashion, right? But if you cut something in an imprecise fashion, then that's okay, right? So for example, like a freeze pop, right? So it's you could either go like this and get like stuff all over. You could use a scissor for it, technically, as long as you're not cutting like if there's no like perforation or anything like that. You'd be allowed to use a scissor. What you cannot do is cut a piece of grass from the ground. That would be an Isser D'Oraisa. Okay.
A watermelon that's on the ground, and you only want the end of it. You cut it off.
You only want one more time.
You only want part of the watermelon.
Okay.
So you cut it while it's there, sitting on the ground.
Okay, and you think that it's detached.
You think it's detached.
Right, and it turns out that it's actually attached.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Right. So you think that you don't realize the watermelon is attached to the ground. Good. Right. So you have like some vegetable or something like that. You want to cut a piece of it, but you don't realize that the thing is attached. Good. Excellent. That would be a perfect case of that. Excellent. Right. So again, so just
attached, then it's still awesome, even though you
correct.
detach it, it's still attached.
Correct. So again, so the case would be right. It's a good example. A case where you have like a watermelon on the floor, on the ground. You think that it's detached, and therefore you want to cut off a piece because you want to eat it. Turns out that it's attached. In which case, that would be the case where you have machlokas Rav and Abaye. Because that's the machlokas Rav and Abaye. Okay, so let's see. Now we're going to get into the reason for this debate. Rav Amar Pater. Rava says you're exempt. Because although I intended to cut, but I didn't intend to do a prohibited cutting, and therefore I'm pater. Abaye says, no, this is a classic case of shogeg because I did intend to do some form of cutting, right? So you could hear which way to look at this, right? Abaye, right? In other words, Abaye is saying that this action is a mistaken action, right? Because I intended to do a form of cutting. Okay, and Rava says, no, this action is no connection whatsoever to anything prohibited because I did not intend to do an action which would have been prohibited. In other words, I didn't intend to do an attached cutting, I plan on doing a detached cutting. And therefore, that's not even a shogeg. It doesn't even cross the threshold of shogeg. To be shogeg, I have to be doing this action in a mistaken fashion. The question is, how do you define this action? Rava says, well, at the end of the day, the action I plan on doing was a detached cutting, and therefore has no relationship to a Shabbostic type of, a forbidden type of cutting, which would be an attached cutting. Abaye says, no, at the end of the day, you plan on doing an act of cutting, and therefore, that is going to be a classic case of shogeg, and therefore we're going to be chayiv. Okay, so now we're going to bring an attempted proof to Rava. It's going to be a long brisa, which is going to be an attention, which is ultimately going to be a proof. Okay, so I feel like we should be a little more clear because I'm not sure if this is getting across so clearly. There's a concept called shogeg, and there's a concept called misasek. Okay, shogeg means I made a mistake. So again, until now, the classic case of mistake is I didn't realize this malacha is aser, right? I didn't know borer is aser. But I plan on doing borer, right? Again, the case of the monopoly money, right? So I'm cleaning up for Shabbos. I don't realize, I know exactly what I'm doing. If you stop the guy and say, hey, what are you doing when you're cleaning up these different bills, the blue and the green and the yellows and whatever? I'm separating them. I'm putting this over here, I'm putting this over there, I'm putting this over there. I know exactly what I'm doing. I just don't know it's aser. That's shogeg. That's classic case of shogeg. Misasek is when a person is doing something else and not doing that act. Right? That is different than shogeg. Right? If I tap the person on the shoulder who's about to do this cutting, I say, what are you doing? He says, oh, I'm cutting something which is not attached. Right? You see, that's obviously very different than a case where I know exactly what I'm doing. Right? Here, I don't know what I'm doing. Right? And so when I don't know what I'm doing, so in a case where, let's say again, a person plans on, you stop the guy who's picking up the keys and ends up picking up the grass. Say, what are you doing? I'm picking up keys. There's nothing like, okay, what's wrong with picking up keys, right? So I have no idea that I'm picking up grass in this action, right? Everyone agrees I'm going to be exempt in that case. Where it gets more complicated is where the guy's doing cutting, right? And you say, where the guy's cutting the watermelon, the case that Murray suggested, right? So you stop the guy, what are you doing? I'm cutting watermelon. So Rava says, okay, but he thinks he's cutting detached watermelon. So I know I'm cutting watermelon, but I think I'm cutting detached watermelon, and therefore that's not the malacha, right? Abaye says, no, but I know I'm cutting a watermelon, attached, detached, I know I'm cutting a watermelon, and therefore that is a case, that's not a case of preoccupied, of not knowing what I'm doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. I happen to not know if it's attached or detached. Right? You see why that middle case is the most complicated, right? So again, shogeg is, I know what I'm doing, I just don't know it's aser. Right? Or I don't know that today is Shabbos. Misasek is, I don't even know the action, what the action I'm doing. I think I'm picking up keys, I end up picking up grass. That everyone agrees is exempt. This middle case is somewhere in between. I know that I'm cutting, I just don't realize that it's attached to the thing that I'm cutting. Is that knowledgeable enough that we compare it to shogeg? Or is that I don't know what I'm doing and therefore completely exempt? Right? That's the middle scenario, right? Okay. Amar Rava. Rava now tries to brings a proof to his approach. Mina amina la. How do I know this halacha? Titania. We have a brisa. The brisa is going to be a little long, or not so long. We're going to unpack this brisa. Chomer, and we have a structure which we've seen so far, which basically what the Amoraim sometimes do, Tanaim sometimes do, is they compare and contrast Shabbos, they compare and contrast like malachos, different halachos one to another to bring out certain laws. They say like we're going to compare like Shabbos and other mitzvos and show you that this is stringent and that Shabbos is more stringent in one way and other mitzvos are more stringent in another way. And basically to bring out different halachos, we compare the different mitzvos. Okay, so says Rava, Titania, Chomer Shabbos mishar mitzvos. Okay, Shabbos is more stringent than other commandments. V'chomer shar mitzvos mishabbos, and in one way. Shabbos is more stringent than other commandments, and in other ways, other mitzvos are more stringent than Shabbos. Okay, and what does that mean? Chomer Shabbos mishar mitzvos. Shabbos is more stringent than other mitzvos. Shabbos, when it comes to Shabbos, asa shtayim behelam echad. If a person committed 2 transgressions in one lapse of awareness, chayv al kol achas v'achas. You're going to be liable for each one. Okay, masha enke mishar mitzvos. When it comes to other mitzvos, you're not. If you do a number of transgressions in one lapse of awareness, you are not going to be chayv for each one. Okay, now the Gemara in a moment is going to define what's the exact scenario, but we'll come back to that. V'chomer shar mitzvos m'Shabbos, and in another respect, other mitzvos are more stringent than Shabbos. Shebeshar mitzvos shagag below miskaven chayav. Regarding other mitzvos, a person made a mistake without any intention. Okay, so again, you act inadvertently without any intention, you're going to be chayav v'chatas. Mash ein came Shabbos. Regarding Shabbos, that is not the case. Okay, so that second statement is the one that's going to be a proof to Rava, but we're going to analyze this brisa line by line. Okay, so we're going to come back again. We're going to go like on a deep dive into this brisa for a moment, and then we're going to come back and see how this is ultimately going to be a proof to Rava, who said what? Rava said, when I cut the watermelon and I think it's detached, I am pater, even though it was attached. Okay, and we're gonna see how there's a proof for him soon. But first, let's analyze the first part of the brisa. Amar Mar. Okay, chomer Shabbos mishar mitzvos. There's a stringency regarding Shabbos more so than other mitzvos. Why? Shabbos asa shtayim mehelam echad. We said that by Shabbos, if you do two transgressions in one lapse of awareness, chayav al kol achas va'achas masha ein mishar mitzvos. Okay, you're going to be chayav for each one. Whereas with other mitzvos, if you do a number of transgressions in one lapse of awareness, you are not going to be chayav. So ask the Gemara, hey Chidami, what's the case that we're referring to? If you want to tell me we're referring to a case where a person did both reaping and grinding in one lapse of awareness, okay? If I know it's Shabbos, and in one lapse of awareness I forget that reaping and grinding are asur, how many karbanos do I bring? 2, right? What would be a parallel case? Again, the Gemara is making these comparisons. This is so by Shabbos, and it's not so by other mitzvos. So by Shabbos, if I do 2 different types of malachos in one forgetting, I bring 2 karbanos, right? But by other mitzvos, that's not the case. What's the parallel case? That achal chelev v'dam. The parallel case would be a person in one forgetting eats both forbidden fats and blood. Okay? Hachatarti mechayev. But in the case of Shabbos, you'd be chayiv too. If you eat blood and fat, forbidden fat, in one lapse of forgetting, you bring 2 karbanos, right? So there isn't a contrast. They're actually the same, right? Elashar mitzvos, dilamechayev elachada hechidami. So we have to come up with a new case. What's the case by other mitzvos? They are only going to be chayiv 1 karban, dachal chelev v'chelev, where you eat forbidden fats twice. Okay, the parallel case in Shabbos would be where I reap, and then I reap again. In both cases, you're going to be chayav 1. Right? In other words, we're struggling over here to understand. The Brisa said, Shabbos, in one lapse of forgetting, you do 2 actions, you're going to be chayav 2, whereas by other mitzvos, you could do 2, by Shabbos, you're going to be chayav 1, and by other mitzvos, you're going to be chayav 2. What's the case? If the case is, I did reaping and grinding, in which case I'm going to be chayav 2 for Shabbos, and I'm going to be. Then the parallel case would be I'm going to be doing harvest. I'm going to be eating blood and eating fat. Let's say for other mitzvos, I'm also going to be chayiv 2. And if you want to say I reaped, and I ate fat, I'm chayiv 1 of each. So we have to find a case where there is that difference between them. What's that case? So the olam david katzira tchina. Okay, so really we're talking about a case where a person did reaping and grinding. In which case you're going to be chayiv 2 karbanos by Shabbos. Umay masha ein came b'shar mitzvos, and when it contrasts other mitzvos, which mitzvos is referring to? Not what we assumed is referring to blood and fat, rather avoda zara. We're referring to idolatry. Ucherav Ami, and we're going with the ruling of Rav Ami. Dam Rav Ami, zibach v'kiter v'nisech balama achas in a chayv achas. Rav Ami holds that if a person does a number of different by avodah zara, there are a number of different actions which are all forbidden under the heading of avodah zara. One of them is slaughtering an animal for avodah zara. One of them is burning an animal for avodah zara. One of them is pouring wine libations for avodah zara. Right? So says Rav Ami that if I do all those things in one forgetting, I'm actually only going to be chayav 1. Okay, so now we understand the first part of the Mishnah, the Brisa, which said that there is more stringent by Shabbos is more stringent than other mitzvos. What it means to say is like this: on Shabbos, if I forget in one lapse of forgetting, I go ahead and I reap and I harvest and I bake. I'm chayav for how many? 3, right? For each one of those things, I'm chayav. Masha ein came b'shar mitzvos by other mitzvos. What meaning specifically avodah zarah? If I do a bunch of different actions, I'm only going to be chayav 1. Okay, so now we see Shabbos is more stringent than other mitzvos. Ask the Gemara, b'mayu kimta. So now you're telling me the Brisa is talking about what? About Avodah Zarah, regarding Avodah Zarah. So Ema Seifa. So now if the Brisa is talking about Avodah Zarah, meaning the contrast is now between Shabbos and Avodah Zarah, that has to read from the beginning of the Brisa all the way to the end of the Brisa, right? There has to be that consistency. So Ema Seifa, let's read the end of the Brisa. What did the end of the Brisa say? Chomer b'shar mitzvos, there is a greater stringency by other mitzvos. Sheb'shar mitzvos, regarding our other mitzvos. Shagag b'lo miskaven chayav, that if one acted by mistake and without intent, you are going to be chayav. Masha ein came b'Shabbos. Regarding Shabbos, that would not be the case. So, hai shagag bla miskaven d'avodah zara hechidami. What's the case where a person acted by mistake and without intention? Okay, by avodah zara. What's the case? Ilema kisavar beis hakneses v'hu v'ishtachav Allah harei libo l'shamayim. So again, and we're saying that and by other mitzvos, if you did a mistake and without intention, then you're going to be chayiv. So if the case is the person thought that a certain building, they come to a certain building and they think it's a shul, and they start bowing and davening in there, and they're bowing towards the Aron. And it turns out, I remember I was in Rome like many years ago, and I was like, I don't know, we're just like walking. I was like 19 and not like reading any manuals or things, whatever it is. And we came to one place and we thought it was just a museum. Turns out it was like this mega church that we're walking around, and all of a sudden we realized like, whoopsie, we're in the wrong place. So we like ended up walking out, right? So a person thinks that you're walking around, you're in this place, and you think it's a shul. It turns out it's a church. Right? And so you're bowing down and all that. So it's shogeg, like complete mistake, and like inadvertent, like because you had no idea this place what it was. If that's what we're talking about, and it turns out it's a church, are you chayiv in that case? No. Harei libo l'shamayim. You think that you're bowing down in a shul, right? And therefore you're going to be completely exempt, right? So we're trying to find a case again where it's both like complete mistake, and we say by other mitzvahs you're going to be chayiv, whereas by Shabbos you're going to be pater. So if the case of avodah zarah is like you had no idea, you thought you walked into shul, turns out you walked into church, and you have your tefillin on and you're davening and you're bowing and all that. So then that's the case you're going to be completely exempt. So we have to have another case. If ad narta, so rather you see a statue of the king, visagila, and you bow down to the statue. Hechidami. So what's the case? If you accept this statue as a god, as a deity, mezidhu. That's a case of that's a case where you are completely deliberate. You're not going to bring a karban chatas. If I accept upon myself the statue being a god, then that's not a case of a mistake. It's a case where it's deliberate. I won't be bringing chatas. V'delo kabla le beloah. And if a person does not accept the person this as a god, lav klumhu, then there's nothing wrong with this case. Okay, so that's obviously not the case either, right? We're trying to find a case. Again, let's just quickly review. We have this one brisa which is comparing and contrasting Shabbos and other mitzvos. We established that when it said other mitzvos, doesn't mean all other mitzvos. It means avodah zarah. And the way we understood the first case is by saying that we're talking about by Shabbos, if I, under one forgetting, I go ahead and I do a bunch of things, I'm going to be chayiv for each one. By avodah zarah, I do a bunch of things, I'm only chayiv one. Cool, the ratio is all good. But then the Seifa gave us a case where I have complete lack of knowledge, inadvertent and no intention, and I'm still going to be chayiv, whereas by Shabbos, I'm not going to be chayiv. So we're trying to find the case of avodah zarah that's the case. We tried saying maybe it's a shul, I'm bowing in a shul. That's not a case of shogeg at all. I'm not. There's no sin over there. And if you want to tell me that I accepted upon myself this deity, this statue being a deity, then I'm going to be chayiv completely. So what's the case? Elamei ahava umeyira. The case must be where the person is serving this idol out of love or fear of a person. Okay, so this is very interesting. We have a person goes ahead and let's say because they love someone, they want to show how much they love this person. So the person also, let's say a person is in a relationship with someone and they want to show them, they don't care about the deity, but they want to show how much it's their business partner, and they want to show how much they love their business partner. So they go to church with the person and they bow down to the deity, they bow down to the God in church for that reason. Okay, so that might be the case, or they're afraid of the person. The person is going to hurt them, and they go ahead and they serve the idol out of fear, but not because they care about the deity. Okay? Maybe that's the case. So the Gemara says, Hanicha la'Abaye damar chayav. This would fit according to Abaye, who says that you are going to be chayav achatas in the case. El Rava damar pater ma'ikal ameimar. So according to Rava holds in a case where you serve an idol out of love or fear, you are exempt. What are you going to say? Now, what does it mean you're exempt? Right? If a person goes ahead and serves an idol out of fear, you're exempt. Why is that problematic? You're supposed to die, right? Avodah zarah is one of the big three. How does Rava say you're exempt? So the Ritva points out it means you're exempt from a karban. You still would have to die. In other words, if after the fact I go ahead and I serve, let's say someone puts a gun to your head and says serve idols, so you have to get killed in that case, right? But let's say you did it out of fear, which is that case, person puts a gun to your head, you would not bring a korban chatas because you would not be serving it because of the nature of the way you're serving it. When he says patri, means you're patur from a korban chatas. At the end of the day, you should have taken the bullets in better than serving the idol in that case. Bottom line is we're rejecting that as well because it doesn't work for everyone. Ella ba'omer mutter. We have to talk about, rather what it means is we're talking about a case where a person thinks that it's permitted to engage in idolatry. Now, that's a very bizarre case. How could someone think that it's permitted to engage in idolatry? So the Gemara says we must be talking about someone who, remember earlier we had this case where a person converted among the non-Jews, right? He doesn't know the laws of the Torah. Now, this is very, very strange, right? Imagine this. Person goes ahead and converts, and now has no idea. Person converts, and it's a full-fledged conversion. He's Jewish, but he doesn't know that he's not allowed to serve idols. Like, what kind of conversion is this, right? But if we pointed out, if you recall, we pointed out there's a piece from a tzaddik who answers this question, saying that a person conversion could be counted by the essence of being a Jew is that I want to be part of the Jewish people, even if I have no idea, not even about God. Right? Meaning this supersedes God. Meaning, imagine this. Again, in a typical conversion, one of the first questions we ask the person is, before they dunk in the mikvah, is, do you know that you can only serve one God and not two gods? The answer, if they answer the wrong answer, you're not converting. Like, that's the most basic question, and that question of idolatry. But Rav Tzadok argues that no, that you see from this Gemara that a person could convert to Judaism and they could think that I'm allowed to serve idols and still be classified as a full-fledged Jew. Why? Because the essence of Judaism is I want to be part of the Jewish people. Right? If you look at Rus and her conversion over there, she says, your nation is my nation. That's the ikr, that's the essence of being Jewish, and everything else is secondary to it. Again, ideally they need to be knowing these things, but we could have a theoretical case where a person thinks that it's permitted to serve idols. Why? And this is such a fundamental idea, just in terms of like, what does it mean? Am I Jewish? Am I good Jew? Obviously we need to keep 613 mitzvos, but the core of Judaism is that I consider myself as part of the Am Yisrael, as part of the Jewish nation, which is, profound idea. Okay, so bottom line is we're talking about the guy thinking that the guy converted among the non-Jews, he thinks that I'm allowed to serve idols. Masha enkem Shabbos depat legamre, right? Whereas on Shabbos we'd say when a person thinks that it's permitted to do this thing on Shabbos, we're going to say the person is going to be pater. So the Gemara says that's not true. If a person thinks that it's completely mutter to do a malach on Shabbos, meaning they don't realize that there's something called Shabbos, and they don't realize there's something called these malachos, right? We had earlier on a question, are you going to be liable for one korban or a bunch of korbanos in that case? No one suggests you're completely pater in that case. Okay, elalav, and here we go. Finally, we have the case. We're getting a little bit closer to what we're trying to prove. Elalav, reisha b'avodos kachavim v'sefer shar mitzvos. So bottom line is we drop this assumption that the entire brisa is talking about avodah zarah, and rather the reisha is talking about avodah zarah. So we contrasted Shabbos to avodah zarah. The sefer is talking about other mitzvos. Okay, so what's the case still? We still haven't explained what the case is. So we've given up on assuming the brisa is all talking about one case, and now we're assuming the sefer is talking about other mitzvos. So what's the case? V'shagag b'lo miskavim b'shar mitzvos heichidami. Right? So what's this case where we say a person acts inadvertently without intent by other mitzvos? What's the case? Desavar deshuman hu v'chalo. The person thinks that they're eating permitted fat, and they end up eating chelev. Okay? So masha ein kem Shabbos to pater. So in a situation where a person thinks they're eating permitted fat, they eat chelev, you're going to be chayav a karban. Masha ein kem Shabbos to pater. Okay? Whereas by Shabbos, you're going to be exempt. And what's the case by Shabbos? What's the parallel case? It's similar to a case where a person intends to cut something that was detached from the ground. They end up cutting something that was attached to the ground, right? In both cases, there's cutting. And by Shabbos, you're going to be pater. So this is Rava's proof to his arguments, right? In the case of other mitzvos, I'm eating, right? I'm eating fat. And one case, I plan on eating permitted fat. I end up eating forbidden fat. I'm going to be chayav. Masha ein kem Shabbos. I plan on cutting something which is permitted. I end up cutting something which is aser. I'm going to be pater. Proof to Rava. Now, how does Abaye understand this? Brisa of Abaye shagab lo miskaven eichidami. So what's the case? The sava roku. So what person thinks. Very bizarre case. Person wakes up and maybe someone played a prank on him. I don't know. We'll just give that scenario where basically a person has something liquid in his mouth and they wake up and there's liquid in his mouth. He goes, oh, it's saliva, and they swallow it. uvlo, they swallow it. But it turns out that the liquid in their mouth, the guy is his name. I don't know, his friend. He's in sleepaway camp, and the friend is a jerk, and they stick some chilav in the guy's mouth. I don't know. Come up with a scenario. Murray, come up with a better scenario because he's good at that. No, not today. Okay. Masha'en came with Shabbos when it's as opposed to Shabbos to pater. What's the parallel case? Did niskaven lagbias a talish person intended to pick up something which is detached, v'chatach is mechubar, whereas they picked up something that was attached. Pater. Right? So that's the parallel case, meaning Abaye gives a scenario which is going to be parallel, but still fits with his learning, which is that a person intends to pick up something which is separate, end up cutting up something which is attached. But if they plan on cutting something which is separate, instead they cut something which is attached, chayiv, you would be chayiv in that case. Bottom line is this price can be interpreted both according to Rava or Abaye, and again we have machlok. Bottom line is the machlokes is a person plans on the watermelon case, person plans on cutting up a piece of watermelon, thinking that it's detached, turns out it's attached. Rava says, your pater, the action you did not intend to do a forbidden action, whereas Abaye says, no, you plan on doing a cutting, and therefore that is a classic case of shogeg according to Abaye, and you would be chayav, and Max will pick up for the next week. Have a great day. Okay, take care.